Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in Borden, Parker, Bowne's Metaphysics, published in 1882. We looked at the concept of, or I should say the category of being in Chapter 1. Now we're going to look at the category of Eidos-Idea. And that's going to run from pages 59 to page 77. It is the essence or the nature of a thing, or Eidos-Idea. Let's begin by taking a look at Block 1, the notion of inner principle. The nature of a thing equals its real essence. Activity is the mark of being, says Bowne. Being must possess a definite form or a definite law. So the nature of a thing is its general form of law that determines it. Now, under thing in itself, sense qualities do not reveal what a thing is. Essential nature equals a thing's interaction, and essential nature enlists both intuitive grasping and rational discernment. But for Brightman, we have to go to note 3. We have to take a look at essential nature and dynamic system, because he always posits the notion of dynamic system. No simple quality can express the nature of a thing. Within a dynamic system, a thing's nature must equal its activity, its movement. So it becomes activity, the law of its activity. The law of activity must be taken into account to define the essential nature of a thing, or its Eidos-Idea. We must look at the law of activity for that particular thing. But we live in a world of the concrete. We live in a world of the sensory, the sensate realm. So we've got to reconcile this notion of idea as activity with the sensate realm in Block 2, reconciling common sense. And that means we take a look at change. We take a look at essential nature and change. We posit the notion of identity through all change. Past and future must be taken into account. No intuition can reveal essential nature, says Bowne. Essential nature is supersensible, or phenomenological for Bowne. Basically, it is a phenomena. Essential nature is a problem of reason, not intuition. Through reason, we reach the rule of action for a thing. That idea that moves, that movement of idea defines the essential nature of a thing. That movement of Eidos-Idea. And so it is a problem for reason for Bowne. He said this is a rational construction, a rational discernment, basically. It's a rational discernment of the rule of action. Now under Note 2, Block 2, Note 2, the nature of elements, thought, feeling, and volition are determined by the principle of the soul. He uses that as an illustration. A thing possesses a certain law which defines it, and that certain law includes its coexistence and its movement of sequence of manifestations. It includes its coming into being, its manifestation. Movement through its various manifestations is included in this Eidos law. But essential nature is a conceived notion of the mind. That is where it exists. And being equals a concrete formula of action. So essential nature must always include a member of a class and a distinction from others within that class. But it is always going to be the member of a class of ideas. In other words, it'll fall under a category as one of many distinct concepts, which makes sense. A category will, just like in the previous lesson, the category of being abbreviated the notion of the real, the notion of the concrete, and the notion of the movement of teleology. So that makes sense. It is a member of a class, but it is distinct. It is a distinct concept. Now, extension is real in Note 3, Block 2, Note 3. The notion of a thing expresses a fixed self-identity. Essential nature must also address purpose, or teleology. Purpose equals its determining law. Again, the eidos law of a thing is that which defines it. The Eidos-Idea. And an idea is an idea of movement. Eidos-Idea does not represent a static entity. Eidos-Idea represents a movement of something, a movement of an essential nature through a thing. But that is, remember, that is a logical concept for Bowne, because he says that we cannot fragment a thing in actuality. It's he's discussing logical concepts here, logical concepts that exist in the mind. So we're ready to move on. We've taken a look at the inner principle of the Eidos-Idea. We've taken a look at the fact that it has to be reconciled with sensate existence. It has to be a determining law of activity within sensate experience that moves a thing forward according to its purpose. So we're ready to take a look at the concept of becoming in Block 3. Because Eidos-Idea essentially for Bowne equals becoming. It's dynamic, so he has to use the concept of becoming, because he can't be locked down to static notions. And so he's going to come up with the notion of becoming as his Eidos-Idea category. So we look at Block 3, law plus sequence of action equals eidos, or essential nature. You've got the law, and then you get the movement of that law in a sequence of action. That defines a thing. That is what defines a thing. It's the Eidos-Idea, the Eidos-Ideal notion. Basically, for Bowne, he means it more as Eidos-Ideal value, but it comes from the Greek Eidos-Idea, from Plato and Aristotle. It is a Greek concept, but Bowne uses it more for an ideal that has a self-actualizing movement. An ideal that has a self-actualizing movement. Remember it in that way. Eidos-Idea for Bowne is a ideal value that has a self-actualizing movement through a thing and within a holistic system. So, if you look at Block 3, Note 1, essential nature is law. Eidos nature equals the principle that determines the form of something and the sequence that it will move through. Form equals this law. Interaction or interrelation must be also addressed, and raw matter must receive this law imprinting. So, a thing is moved according to its form and sequence, and that is the eidos essential nature that it has. And then note 2, essential nature is also action. From sequence of activity, we form the rule or the law for a thing, for an item, for an external object. We define that rule of law. There is a concrete order of action for everything and for everything within the overall system. We must also address permanence of identity. Identity is maintained through every sequence of activity. So that takes us to 3.3, essential nature as becoming. That's the concept that Bowne wants to use. Essential nature is becoming. Law plus action equals becoming. Law plus action equals becoming. And if you remember our prior lessons with Brightman, remember it was all about the moral laws, because those were categories. Okay, those were categories. Remember, the moral laws were categories. We had the formal, the axiological, and the personalistic. Remember that? We had three categories of the formal, the axiological, and the personalistic. Well, he got that from Bowne. He got that from Borden Parker Bowne. That's where Brightman got it. And so Bowne is telling us that law plus this sequence of action equals the becoming of the Eidos ideal within a thing and within the holistic system. And I love this. If you look at 3.3 note A, there is a causal continuity between the states of reality. Remember, we already talked about the realm of positing. We posit what? Causal units. Remember that? We posit causal units. Like I say, for Bowne and for Brightman, the realm of positing is extremely significant. It's the realm of the real. And so Bowne tells us that there is causal continuity between the states of reality. Change includes both law and ground. We posit the notion of becoming, and now here you go. Take a look at D and E. Our posited causal unit creates causal continuity. Our posited causal unit creates causal continuity, which is our perceived essence of the real. This is in the notion of the real in existence. So Bowne pulls it all full circle with the first lesson, with chapter 1, our previous lesson. He just goes back full circle now and says that posited causal unit creates causal continuity, identity through change. And that is what? That's our posited notion of the real. And what do we posit? We posit the essence of a thing, of these units of the true, but they're enclosed within a larger holistic system of the true and a holistic system of the real. So Bowne is telling us that basically last lesson, being becomes enjoined with here Eidos-Idea, and the movement of being with the imprint of Eidos-Idea equals the system of becoming. The being from our first lesson, which is always a movement of activity, well, that activity is directed by the Eidos idea or ideal value that empowers its teleological purpose, and so it's being plus idea equals the becoming of a thing and the becoming of a thing within the holistic system. So in this lesson we get a look at the concept of Eidos-Idea, which is a Platonic concept. Bowne uses it more for activity than, he doesn't like that static realm of ideas that Plato had. That doesn't work for Bowne. Bowne is more Aristotelian, and he looks at these ideas as principles of movement. I mean, he calls them first principles. They are principles of movement. They are Eidos first principles, and that means it's a principle of action, activity of movement. So it's not the static realm of ideas that Plato conceived of, although Bowne does appreciate the notion, he borrows the notion of these Eidos ideas from both Plato and Aristotle, but he gives it a Boston personalism translation. It becomes the principle of the activity, the principle of a directed activity toward the teleology that is being opened up and fulfilled. It's all about this dynamic movement of system within which these Eidos ideas move and have their being. They can only be separated and logically discussed in thought. In reality, they are not broken up. They are holistic. They are causal units. Remember, they are causal units in reality. But in mind, we can discuss the logical categories and the logical concepts as notions with the understanding that we know that they are units, causal units within system in actuality. But in this lesson, we get tremendous teaching on the fact that being must be enjoined with Eidos-Idea. Being must be enjoined with idea, and it must be reconciled with the sensate realm, with common sense. And by reconciling it, I like the fact that he used reconciliation. This movement is a reconciliation of sorts for Bowne. Now that's a Christian term, but he's using it as a philosophical term, but I like that idea. We are reconciling actuality according to the posited reality of the Eidos-Idea that is posited, which defines the essential nature of a thing as a causal unit within the holistic system of value. So that's going to give us our second lesson on Bowne, on the essence or the eidos or the nature of a thing. And that'll wrap up 59 to 77. We'll pick up next time on page 78.